Is vaping just keeping smokers smoking longer?
Hi, I'm Felix Norton. I'm a professor of health psychology at the University of East Anglia, and I lead a research program focused on looking at innovative ways to help people to quit smoking, particularly using new technologies.
Hi, Felix. I want to ask you about dual use, so both smoking and vaping. Is that just keeping smokers smoking and therefore not doing anybody any good?
Well, the evidence with dual use is that it's, for most people, a stepping stone towards becoming tobacco free, but really it depends on the patterns of use. So when you have dual users using two products, those that vape a lot, so people who vape every day and multiple times a day, they're much more likely to, in the near future, become tobacco free compared to people who just vape occasionally, not every day. And in one of our studies where we were tracking dual users every day for a number of months, on a given day, the more a person vaped, the less they smoked. And this showed that those two products substituted for each other. So if we can encourage people who are dual users to vape more and to smoke less, then they'll be much more likely to be able to move and shift away from smoking tobacco at all to exclusive e-cigarette use, and then potentially later on that's something they want to do to move away from being completely nicotine free.
So that's really interesting. And your study isn't the only one that's found that, is it? Because I think the International Tobacco Control Study, and that's looking at Canada, England, US, and Australia, they also find that people who vape daily are more likely to quit smoking at follow-up. Is that right?
Well, that's right. And I think some of the early evidence, which didn't look at the patterns of vaping, showed quite mixed findings about whether vaping was helpful or harmful towards people achieving tobacco abstinence. But it was really those later studies where they really broke down vaping among dual users in particular into people who did it a lot versus people who were just doing it occasionally, which really highlighted the role that that vaping has among dual users for helping them to become tobacco free. And as I mentioned, it's important for people who do dual use to really shift as much as they can towards the vaping and less of the smoking. And that was really something that seems to be quite consistent across studies that have really started to look into patterns of vaping, whereas previous studies didn't really do that.
So since I heard you give your talk, and since I read those two papers from ITC, and actually Jonathan Folds in the US has done some experiments that are finding the same thing, I've been saying the trick is to make sure you vape every day. If you want a decent chance of quitting, or if you want your patient to have a decent chance of quitting, encourage them to vape every day. And a colleague said to me, well, hold on a second, Martin, you're getting confused there because you've got a selection bias. I mean, vaping works for people who vaping works for. Is that right?
It's really important that people who vape or dual use find that vaping satisfying. And that's one issue, that if people aren't finding it satisfying, they are going to be less likely to do as much. And so that might explain why people who vape less may be less likely to go forwards to stopping any tobacco use and instead going to exclusive vaping. And so I think it's really important that people are supported to, if they're not finding a vape satisfying, that people are supported to change different flavors or different types of e-liquid or different devices to find one that suits them and gives them something that's satisfying and is a good replacement for smoking. So it is true that there is, it does depend on people's experiences. I think also when people experience severe stress in their lives or something unexpected happens, sometimes they go back to an old coping mechanism of going back to tobacco. And I think forewarning people and supporting them to avoid that has the potential to minimize the chance that they will go back to tobacco or give up trying to vape at all and just go to exclusive tobacco use.
I remember when I was a smoker trying to quit, often when I relapsed, it would be because of stress or because everybody around me was smoking, and it just seems like a hard thing not to do. So your results were really interesting and important. But what really excited me, as you might remember, is your approach in your study, because it kind of recognized the expertise of the vapors, the quitters, in a way that you don't often see. Can you just run us through what you did with that study?
Yeah, so in this study, what we did was after collecting data from each individual for 3 months using daily surveys, as we summarized that data and then provided it to them and then spoke to them about how they interpreted that data. That was particularly useful because there are sometimes unexpected findings there that we couldn't interpret and really needed their expert and experienced perspective on, what was happening on this day? Why did you stop vaping for 3 days here, whereas all the other time you were vaping and smoking at the same time? And so this gives us a much richer picture of the different styles of dual use and factors that move people either towards exclusive vaping or perhaps back towards exclusive smoking.
That is really very lovely. I just the idea of recognizing people's expertise in their own lives is just something that I think is wonderful to see in research. Some of the surveys, like the survey I was involved in at ASH, they're finding that people say one of the reasons they don't want to try vaping is they don't want to swap one addiction for another. What should I be saying to those folks?
I think that perhaps the first thing to consider is that tobacco addiction is more than just nicotine addiction. So there are elements in tobacco which contribute to the addictiveness of it, and that's well established now. So moving to vaping with nicotine is likely to continue a nicotine addiction, but without the additional elements of tobacco addiction that comes with using tobacco. So that would be the first point to make. It's not the same addiction. The second point, I think, which is increasingly well understood, is that vaping carries a substantially lower risk to health compared to tobacco, and so is very much a lower risk product. The potential for it to be a stepping stone towards full abstinence to nicotine, being nicotine-free completely, is something which has real potential for those people that do want to make that complete shift away from not having any nicotine in their lives. But it still gives an option for people who perhaps aren't ready for that step towards being completely nicotine-free, but are able to use a product which is much less harmful and gives them more flexibility when they do want to plan to make that final step, if that's something that they want to do.
That's great, Felix. So just let me see if I've got this right. We know from your study and others that vaping every day is an important factor in predicting and maybe causing smoking cessation down the line. Are there other patterns of behavior that have a similar relevance?
Well, we're still learning about different patterns, but another one that's emerged is the speed at which people switch from tobacco to dual use to exclusive vaping seems to be important. So people who make that switch quickly and attempt to go to exclusive vaping from dual use have a greater chance of success of being tobacco free than people who take much longer. So again, a bit like with the using vaping, as much as possible in place of smoking, if you can switch quickly from dual use to exclusive vaping, the quicker you do that, it looks like the more chance you have of being successful.
True or false? Vapors are just swapping one addiction for another.
Well, that's partially true, but tobacco is a much more difficult addiction to stop, and it's much more harmful for vaping. Vaping is a much lower risk addiction, and is only includes an addiction to nicotine, unlike tobacco, which has additional constituents in it that make the product much more addictive.
Felix Nogden, thank you very much.